Hi, I'm Joe Finsternis, and tonight I'm going to be talking to you about a movie called Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. So, this is an animated movie based on a comic book of the same name, which was written by Frank Miller, the same guy who wrote the Sin City and 300 comic books. And to my understanding, The Dark Knight Returns was like the Batman comic book, which set him up as the character we know him as today. Like, apparently it was because of that graphic novel that we got the Tim Burton Batman movies, the animated series, and the Dark Knight trilogy. So I thought that was pretty interesting for sure. For the record, I haven't read The Dark Knight Returns, so I'm not going to be making any comparisons to the comic book. Everything that I say in this video is purely based on what I got from the movie. So in this, Bruce Wayne has been retired from being Batman for a whole decade. And, he starts hearing on the news about these mutants who are running amok in Gotham. Although the mutants aren't really mutated people, they're just people with weird-looking mohawks, and they're wearing these red visors, sort of like Cyclops from the X-Men. They do have a leader who looks like a mutant, he's got these glowing red eyes, he's got pointy teeth, and for some reason pointy nipples. I thought that was kind of odd, but Bruce Wayne starts hearing all about these guys on the news, and then finally he sees this story in the newspaper about a little boy whose parents were murdered by the mutants, and that kind of triggers a reaction in him. He starts having these flashbacks and hallucinations, and ultimately decides to once again don the Batman suit. And as he's going after these bad guys in the movie, as he's starting over again, you can tell that he's gotten pretty rusty. He has a hard time climbing the rope to his grappling hook. As he's moving around in the shadows, he's actually making noise, which, for those unfamiliar with Batman, Batman does not make noise. And of course, once he gets back home, he's suffering some severe back pain. But there is also a new Robin to take up the mantle, and in this iteration of the story, it's a female character, which I thought was kind of interesting. The name Robin isn't very gender specific. It's just like the name Captain Marvel. The title of Captain doesn't have to belong to a man. But I thought that Robin's storyline was kind of the biggest plot hole, to tell the truth. All you really know about her, at least from this movie, is that she has some shitty parents, and once she dons the costume and starts fighting crime with Batman, she knows all these combat moves and all these acrobatic moves as well, which she wasn't raised in a circus. So I was just thinking to myself, how does she know this stuff? I guess that if you're living in a rough neighborhood, you have to learn how to fight, but that still doesn't explain the acrobatic skills, but whatever. So this movie does feel like reading a series of Batman comics because it has a very episodic feel to it. There's a situation with Two-Face that kind of comes and goes. Even the mutants who, are set up to be the main antagonists in this movie are pretty much done with halfway through the film. But then after that happens, that's when the Joker starts coming back into power. And I thought that the way that they set him up was really interesting. Like, during the whole first half of this movie, he's in Arkham Asylum, and he's just gone catatonic. I mean, he isn't moving much, he isn't speaking, he isn't even smiling, but once he hears on the news that Batman has returned, it actually gives him a reason to go on. And of course, the theory that Batman creates his own villains is brought up in the movie. So I thought that was a pretty interesting story element. And then, once the Joker comes and goes, there's a final conflict involving Superman before the movie's finally over. And I'm really not giving away any spoilers here. I mean, I think it's common knowledge by now that Superman does show up in the movie. I mean, there were these little pictures that came with the deluxe edition, at least, and one of which showed, Batman in the foreground with the Joker and Superman standing behind him, plus the comic book that this animated film was based on is also kind of the inspiration for the upcoming Batman vs. Superman movie. Now, as far as the Joker goes in this movie, going back to him, I thought that he pretty much got the job done, but, I hate to draw comparisons to the other Jokers, but he honestly felt a lot more subdued than what we're used to seeing, which wouldn't be that bad, but I don't know. He had some messed up moments for sure, but as a whole, I just didn't think he was all that memorable. He was just serviceable, I guess. And as far as the animation itself goes as well, with this being a straight-to-DVD DC Comics movie, the animation is a little bit on the stiff side. It doesn't move as fluidly as a bigger budget, big screen movie might be, but once again, it is something that gets the job done. It really wasn't much of a nuisance for me. I thought that the color palette, the soundtrack, and the voice acting were all solid enough to make the animation sort of secondary in nature. And despite the fact that this movie is animated, as can be expected from, a comic book movie based on something by the author of Sin City and 300, this isn't exactly recommended for younger viewers. If you've got kids, this doesn't have any blatant sexuality or anything. I mean, there is a female bad guy who shows up in the movie who has these swastikas taped over her nipples, and that's like all she's wearing on her upper body. But outside of that, this also has some pretty violent scenes in it. Even though it's rated PG-13, they can get away with a lot more in animation than they do in live action. Like, there's one character who gets a batarang flung right into his eye socket, and he goes walking around with that in there for the rest of the time he's on screen. But if you think your kids can handle that kind of stuff, then by all means let them watch it, I guess. Also, the movie runs for a pretty long time. If you're easily bored, or if you've got kids that are easily bored, then it doesn't exactly come recommended. It runs for nearly 2.5 hours, about the same length as one of the Dark Knight movies. But in the end, despite the fact that the movie did have some minor flaws here and there, I still thought that it was pretty solid as a whole. And if you're into Batman and you don't mind, and if you don't mind stiff, straight-to-DVD animation, then it definitely comes recommended. And speaking of recommendations, prior to this, I've only seen 3 animated comic book movies. Actually 4 of them now. I just saw Big Hero 6 this weekend, which was pretty awesome. But yeah, other than that, I've watched all Batman-related movies. He's my favorite superhero. I've seen Mask of the Phantasm, Gotham Knight, and Assault on Arkham, and enjoyed all of them. But if there are any other animated comic book movies out there, they don't have to be Batman related. They could be anything DC, Marvel, or otherwise. But If there are any others out there that you would recommend, let me know what they are in the comments, and I'll definitely consider viewing them. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about Batman The Dark Knight Returns. I hope you all have a good one.